Okay, we are officially live and starting. My name is Betsy Pilon. I serve as the Director of Public Relations for Eton Academy, and thank you everyone for joining us today. On the actual Zoom meeting and screen that everyone is seeing, we are also joined with Mary Beth Casey, who is our Director of Life Prep and College and Life Prep, and Dr. Richard Bush, who is currently serving as the Dean of Black Hawk College, and he's a good longtime friend of Eton. We are talking about life after high school in this era of COVID, and we're really excited to kick off this event today. A couple of housekeeping items. The chat will be open both on social media as well as for Zoom participants for any questions that come up during this event that we will answer at the end of the presentation. So please feel free to use those, and we'll be monitoring throughout. If you haven't already put yourself on mute, please do so. If you are on the Zoom call, and I'm going to pop off and turn this over to Mary Beth.
Thank you, Betsy. Thank you for joining us. As Betsy said, my name is Mary Beth Casey, and I'm the director of our College and Life Prep office. We typically offer a session around this time with Dr. Bush where we talk about how to choose the right program. It's, part 2 of our presentations regarding life after high school. But we thought that we needed to do something a little bit different given the situation and many questions that have been coming in since we've been at home. And so I asked him to join me in doing a presentation that really just actually answers your questions on everything from, planning for senior year next year to admissions process for life after high school programs and how to search for them, given that, visiting campuses just looks different right now. And so I thought I could use a little bit more expertise on that end to help me. So I appreciate Dr. Bush being here with us today. I know that he can lend a lot of insight from his side of the admissions table and working with life after high school students and adults on what's happening. So I appreciate you being here. Dr. Bush, was there anything you want to add about yourself?
Well, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be back speaking on this subject with everyone here. As you can tell probably behind me, I'm in transition. I actually moved from Michigan to Iowa in the last year, so I'm still trying to unbury myself. But these are unusual times, and they are certainly challenges and add more challenge to this than ever before. So if we thought the idea of applying for college was one that was daunting and difficult, COVID adds an entirely new dimension to it. So we hope to be able to address some of your questions, speak to some of the more important points that have changed, that haven't changed, and to help give you some information that you can work with. So
that's great. Thank you. I think I love that on the Zoom meeting we have a mixture of senior parents, junior parents, soon to be senior parents, and then even a couple sophomore going into junior year parents. So I think that's a really representative group of the different questions that each grade level is asking right now, right? Everyone's kind of in a different place in the process. And I think the one thing that I want to say before we start getting to questions about, specifically the admissions process or different programs that we have questions on, is that it's so fluid right now. And so I think one question that a lot of families have been emailing is test optional. What's going to happen with ACT testing? What's going to happen with SAT testing? And how is that going to play a role into the admissions process for next year? And I think right now, the one thing that I can say is that it's ever changing, right? ACT thought for a second that they would be able to do home testing. I don't know how that has evolved, but I think they ran into a lot of equity challenges right from the beginning, and a lot of ethical questions about how that would work. So I'm not sure that standardized testing is going to play as large of a role in the admissions process moving forward. And I don't know, Dr. Bush, on your end, have you seen a change in that trend at all? Has anybody made some solid choices that you know of?
There have been some major discussions in those areas. So a lot of places are using multiple measures now to figure out whether or not a student is ready for college, like the standardized testings used to be able to give us that glimpse. So they're looking at GPAs, they're looking at the extended portfolio, they're looking at the practice SATs that were done as their measure. So there's multiple ways of trying to get to this point, but do I think that standardized testing is going to go away in the future or take a very minority role in applications? I don't. I really do see it coming back when we find a way to make that happen. In similar environments like this, I do see it playing an equal role to other multiple measures that we can use to admit students. So diminish a little bit, certainly. I don't think it will carry the weight that it once had, but it will certainly still play a major role. It may play 50 or more % of the role in the future versus the high percentage that it once played.
I think, a lot of people have hypothesized. There's a group on Facebook that I'm a part of called Hacking the Gates, and it's a group of, admissions counselors, representatives, but also high school counselors as well, talking about, how do we best help our students when applying to college or life after high school programs, other post-secondary programs. And one of the things that we said is for different learners, some of this is to our benefit right now, that a lot of different learners sometimes struggle with standardized testing, don't always paint a picture of what they are able to do and whether or not they're college ready. And so with schools, in Michigan, specifically Eastern, was one of them that made a really quick decision to go test optional for this coming fall. And so applicants who had previously applied, they moved really quickly to an interview process for those students who weren't able to submit final ACT scores. And I think in the short term, that's going to be of a benefit to the seniors who are graduating right now and the juniors of the next class. But I think I'd have to agree with you that for the classes moving forward, will that disappear as an admission standard or measure? Probably not. No, they're still going to have that. But I am wondering if anyone's tracking the data or will track the data in the future of what happens to these two specific classes without this heavy measure of standardized testing, and what that means for retention or for matriculation, and whether or not anyone looks at that for future use.
Well, I think you can guarantee that this data will be tracked, and we'll be looking at the outcomes for these students for the next 4 to 6 years. Not only at a national level, but we're going to be required as institutions to look at these two classes of students. How well did they retain, persist, and how many of them graduated within that 150% range of activity? And for those who don't understand the 150%, if a student goes into a 2-year program, they need to complete it within 3 years for the national reporting. 150%. For a 4-year program, to be able to complete it within 6 or less years is the 150%. So when we look at the cohorts that are coming into existence over the next 2 years, we'll be tracking that data to see, did our multiple measures help identify and more appropriately place those students in the beginning, and how well did they persist, how well did they matriculate through the system and then graduate? And what was the outlook for them at the end of it? So you're going to see it at an institutional level, you're going to see it at a state level, you're going to see it at a national and regional level as well as we collect that data. For those of us who are in public institutions, that's required. So we will have to track that for purposes of state funding, grant funding. How did we deal with the COVID dollars? All of that will be part and parcel to what were the outcomes from this.
I think that get a little nerdy when I think about that data in a couple of years and how it might impact admissions practices moving forward. And there's already been a lot of conversation, obviously, with test optional schools. Ferris State was one in Michigan that went test optional, so did Alma, before, COVID became a thing. And I think the schools are also battling whether you do the holistic approach, right? And you're looking at the entire process with multiple people, or whether or not you're, doing it with just one person looking through all of your portfolio. So it's just an interesting position that we find ourselves in amongst a time that's really uncomfortable and uncertain. There might be some really positive changes that come out of this for a lot of students who have struggled in the admissions process. I think that is my hope on that end of it, at least.
Well, it may actually level out the measures that we use to bring a student on and give greater access to students who might have otherwise been denied access.
And it brings me to another thing that I think a lot of families are thinking about, and then I think we'll open it up to questions so that we're hitting exactly what is on your minds most, is that if students are not able to participate in the activities that they normally would participate during this summer. So I'm thinking about my sophomores and my juniors wanting to get jobs and start building, that layer of their resume, or volunteer work, and building up other pieces of their portfolio that they may struggle to do so in this time if things are not, going back to a little bit normal over the summer. Do you have any thoughts on what that's going to look like from the admissions process for those students?
I think the simple answer is that as long as they can articulate why, and discuss in a cogent and mature way what happened, what their goals were, what their intentions were, they'll be fine. Just articulate that. I know a number of students, college students, for example, who are going to be forced into a gap summer because they can't go back to work. Now, how do you explain that disruption or that interruption in your resume? Well, it's very simple. You can talk about how this wasn't available, or that job laid me off, or what have you. So articulate that. Make sure that you don't hide it. There's nothing to hide. Everybody is impacted by COVID. Just lay it out there on the table.
I think that's great. I think those essay questions are going to become a little bit bigger of a role in how you answer those and articulate.
Absolutely.
Your abilities and your strengths. Probably those letters of recommendation too. So for my junior parents, thinking about who those letters of rec are coming from and giving, those people enough time to create those will be super important over the summer. So you can start thinking about those. We can open it up for questioning if anyone has specific questions that they'd like to ask of Dr. Bush or myself, so that we get to the heart of what's really on your minds. And then Betsy can let us know if there's anything coming in from the stream, if there's any questions.
I haven't seen anything come in from our social media stream. So if you have a question for Mary Beth or Dr. Bush, you can please unmute yourself and you can ask.
Perfect.
I have one question.
Hi, Noelle.
Hi. Hopefully my dogs will be quiet here. So is there a time frame when most universities, whether public or private, have to make a decision by for fall based on funding, based on, I don't even know what, but just, is there a time frame, or is that, who knows, or different for each? Thank you.
It is different for each. And I can tell you that it's going to be very different this year than a normal year. We would love to have students apply as early as possible, a complete application as possible. And I stress the word complete. Quite often we get the application and there's a lot of missing parts. But the most complete application possible as early as possible helps admissions and other elements of the institution make decisions faster. But this adds a whole wrinkle to it.
I saw there were a few universities who extended their May 1st deadline for decisions, trying to give everyone a little bit of extra time to adjust to what's happening and, figure out what their plans will be. I think another question along those deadlines and making decisions, is there anything that's required in making choices of being on campus in the fall or virtual in the fall? Have you seen universities that are saying absolutely they will be virtual in the fall, or is there a time frame that decision has to be made by for your constituents?
I think that really depends on each community and each constituency group. What we are seeing are a number of institutions that have residencies are going to start with. So if they've got a very residential population in the dormitories and whatnot, they're opting on average to be virtual in the fall. And for good reason. I mean, you don't want a dormitory to become the next hotspot. That would just not go over well.
Sure.
At the end of the day, I think that everyone is trying to make the best decision that they can with the data that we have. Some of it's driven by the state that they're in. So if a state is in a stricter lockdown, they are likely to be opting for a virtual fall, an online fall, online summer right now. If they're loosening up quite a bit, then they're taking comments and information in from their families, from their staff and faculty, and from the students themselves to determine, should we be partially online? Should we be all online? Should we be back to normal? So it's a very fluid situation. There's no really good metric right now for making that decision immediately. I have to applaud a number of institutions that have made that decision early on to either be one or the other or some variation and stick to it. But I even suspect some of them will change if they haven't already.
I think that's the conversation that we have been having as well, is that the best resources I feel are to go right to the school's website. So if you have a school that you've already been accepted to and are planning on attending in the fall, the best answer that anyone has is to go straight to the website and look at their postings on what they're doing for COVID. I think, go ahead.
And I was going to say, search the news. Many of their press releases may not make it to their website right away, but you may have press releases in their local news that have talked about how the president or the provost or the chancellor or the vice chancellor have decided on X or Y or Z, and that will give you some insight as well into what their thinking is and where they're going. But
then it sounds like we're also saying be careful that those may change as well as, you know, things progress and things change. So they may.
They may.
I believe that there's some Michigan campuses. I want to say Central is one of them that has said we're going to do both. We're going to be open, but if you want to do virtual, we're going to allow for that option, as long as they take the necessary precautions to have students on campus. And is the second you say if and as long as, then that leaves the opportunity sometime from now until August for any of those solutions to change, right? So I think that that's just a really important message. Is to stay up to date on what that specific school is doing by looking in the news or going to their website, and then just know and be flexible that it's probably going to change, because like you said, this is such a very fluid situation. Betsy, you said that there was a question.
Yes. So just if you could just reiterate a little bit about, you know, kind of the high points of the changing landscape, and, you know, in particular about standardized testing and how that, you know, is playing a part of potentially being waived, and, you know, what the chatter is about that right now.
Yeah, just to kind of briefly recap what we had talked about was that Dr. Bush and I both agreed that it is unlikely that standardized testing will go away as a measure for admissions or as a standard of practice. However, maybe for the short term, either this year or next year, there is some impact that its measure may be not as impactful as the whole portfolio will be. So we often talk about admissions being, you know, two different types, either holistic, right, where they're looking at the complete profile and the entire portfolio. So from the GPA to the essays, to the letters of rec, to the extracurriculars, and how all of that looks together versus, you know, looking at standards of measure as in you have to have this score on the ACT and you have to have this GPA, right? When you get a little bit more minute in those, then it becomes harder. So what we think might happen in the short run is that the standardized testing will maybe not carry as much weight as it has traditionally, which will lead to some data collecting over the next few years about how this group of students, and possibly, you know, the class of 2021 and maybe even 2022, depending on how this shakes out, the impact of admissions practices and retention and matriculation and what that looks like for the future. So I was saying from a high school admissions perspective, I'm optimistic about what that means for leveling the playing field when it comes to college admissions, but that's yet to be seen on what it will look like permanently. Dr. Bush, did you want to add anything to that?
The only thing that I want to add is it's very clear that, again, this is another fluid thing that's changing with the environment because of the lack of ability to test. But one of the things that, as you were speaking, that reminded me was many of these admissions criteria of the past were used also to qualify for scholarships. And so I have yet in my conversations with colleagues around the country had that conversation about how this will impact those scholarships. So that is going to be an institution by institution decision and an institution by institution process that'll either be updated or I hope that they update their processes to incorporate other measures, other ways of identifying students that qualify for scholarships as well. So everything you said plus a little bit more.
That's a really great point. I wasn't even thinking about scholarships. It's a really interesting perspective. And ultimately financial aid will be impacted in some form or another, given just the nature of the situation we're in as well.
Incomes are going to be lower, so financial aid is going to be stressed, I think, a little bit more.
Sure. Betsy, was there another question from?
Yes, Jessica on our Zoom call has raised her hand. So Jessica, if you want to ask your question.
Great.
Yes, hi. I just had a question. I'm wondering, Dr. Bush, if you're seeing trends or new thinking or new solutions in the way of accommodations when it comes to college. I think those are challenging probably at every educational level in this climate. And if this is going to be, something that we're adjusting to for a while, are there things that colleges are already finding or utilizing to help serve student accommodations as needed in a remote working environment?
Obviously, in a remote working environment, we can only control just so much. So whereas if they were on campus, we have other accommodations for students who might have mobility issues or might be sight impaired and need navigation, those kind of things, certainly when we end up back on campus. But for unique learning styles that we at Eton Academy have from time to time, all of the measures that are in place for a face-to-face classroom are also in place for an online classroom. It's not as easy to deliver some of those things online as it is on ground, depending upon the amount of investment or the type of technology being used at both ends of the equation. So the equipment that the student has can have an impact on how well their learning is facilitated in that online environment. But what I would say is that is important is any student with a disability or a unique learning style, that they always get a hold of the Disability Services Department within the place or the institution that they're going, register and advocate for themselves, and get what is afforded them under those provisions to help level the playing field for their study. The best news I can give you, Jessica, on top of all of that, is that these institutions are full of people like me and Eton students who have unique learning styles. And we are there to make sure that they succeed, even online. So we want to make sure if they're willing to raise their hand and say, I learn a little differently, we want to make sure we're there for them. So having them register their uniqueness is very important to helping us help them.
That's really great. I think that just to piggyback on that a little bit, when we talk about accommodations at the college level, one other reason why I'm very thankful that Eton has invested in the College and Life Prep office and in my role, because I think I think one thing that, we can do for our students, among all the other things that we're doing with our students, is really looking at finding the right fit for what post-secondary planning looks like. And that's just such an important piece of making sure that the program that you choose, or, the path that you choose after life after high school, has the supports and services to offer that can fit your needs the best. And we spend a lot of time talking about what are our strengths and what are our challenges, and what strategies and accommodations do we need to assist that. And it'll be, I think, more important now than ever for students to be able to confidently articulate that and practice that, and something that we do a lot in Essentials, as well as talk about, well, what strategies. I think this is again, trying to find the bright spot in a very difficult situation, is that a lot of our students are testing out virtual learning at the college level right now. And we're having these conversations about what strategies we're using that we might be used to being given to us by a person in front of us. And how can we work on becoming independent and transferring those skills? So we work on those essentials of learning, our listening strategies, our reading strategies, and our general learning fundamental strategies of that, transferring those skills from what we were doing at Eton to our home virtual learning, and really honing those skills, because those are going to be needed more than ever, depending on how long we're stuck like this, right? So right. I think that's really good practice many students are getting right now. And maybe not perfect, right? This type of learning and environment takes a lot of executive functioning skills, and what do many of us have difficulty with are those executive functioning skills. So I think if it's not going perfect, it's a great opportunity to develop new skills, practice new things, find new strategies in a somewhat safe way, right? We're not off at college on our own, in charge of our own learning yet. We have lots of support people from our end to help practice those things and revise and refine. And I think it's a really good opportunity to practice those skills.
Great. Our next question is from Christine.
Perfect.
So Christine, if you want to unmute and ask.
Hi.
Hi, Christine.
I was just wondering, I mean, I've been following the news. From what I understand, many colleges are planning for both in-person or virtual classes. The state of California just announced that their system is going to be virtual in the fall. I guess my interest is the financial part of the piece. With the Michigan shutdown, the state budget has been impacted, and the state funds, I guess 27% of the state budget goes toward our state colleges. And I just wonder if more people are gonna possibly do community college. And then I have personal friends that have what I would consider normal learners at college, and they're in the midst of going to college out of state, and they're pushing back and saying, we're not paying out of state tuition for our child to be learning virtually. So
an interesting question. Sure.
I just was wondering, if just about that whole area. I mean, community college is looking really good if you're still in lockdown.
Mm-hmm. Well, and speaking from a community college, we're very hopeful that is the case, that stay home and come to community colleges, because we're a pretty darn good price for what you get. But I will tell you this, that seniors who are looking at that career path and they want to be at University X someday, okay, at some point, I would make sure that they look at the programs at that university that they want to go into, that they really desire as their future career. I don't want, and I'll back up just a minute, I want none of the students ever to leave college seeking a job. I want them to seek a career and a profession, because that's what makes them excited, and that's what drives them for the rest of their lives, because they're going to want to wake up and do that. So find that place that's got that 4-year program that they really want someday, or that 2-year program that they really want someday, because it's their passion, their career, their area of interest that they're fascinated with. And then start looking at the articulation agreements between community colleges and those 4-year institutions that are built to make sure that if they start at the community college, they will not miss a beat when they go to the 4-year college. Now, this is my first stint in a community college. I've been at 4-year institutions and doctoral granting institutions for the last 25 years. So I can tell you, I have seen better results from students who have come through community colleges to 4-year institutions, because the fact that they now know how to learn, they have acquired the basics that they need. They've gotten a lot of the stuff out of the way that I want them to have done, and have gotten a good foundation in the career of their choice. And now I can really just explode that knowledge out when I was in a 4-year institution. I loved community college students that were well prepared. Now, from a parent standpoint, it really helps too, because if you're paying $140 a credit hour at a community college versus $400 a credit hour at a 4-year institution, it doesn't take high mathematical skills to figure out that a 1-year or a 2-year at a community college is 1/4 of that of the same 2 years at the university. That's a significant chunk of change. And God only knows when this situation is going to pass us by. But I think each family needs to sit down and have that strategy conversation. Where are we going to do? What are we going to do? How are we going to get to the ultimate goal? I want my kid to graduate from U of M. I want them to graduate from MSU or OU. Okay, great. But we're going to start here at this community college because it's a quality program and it matriculates to that 4-year institution. All right, how do we plan that out? And that's where your strategy needs to come into play if that's of interest to you. Now, if you're looking at going to an out-of-state institution, that's a little trickier. And you need to dig a little deeper and have deeper conversations with that 4-year institution about the strategic, tactical class choices that you have to make at a 2-year institution that will transfer to that 4-year. In Michigan, we had the MTA, which is the Michigan Transfer Agreement between 2 years and 4 years, where we mapped 2-year curriculum to 4-year curriculum. And a lot of students have that within their state, what community colleges what programs will transfer from the community college level up to the 4-year level. Some are not program by program, some are course by course. So that's, you have to keep that in mind. When you're talking about an out-of-state institution, you have to think from the course by course perspective. And so that makes your job a little bit harder, because now you have to be very conscious about what courses you're going to choose to take at that community college, knowing that they will then transfer. They may not be the ones that you would normally have taken, let's say for Oakland University, if you want to go to Penn State. So you'll have to do a little work there. But it's very achievable, it's very doable. A lot of 4-year institutions have transfer scholarships as a result as well. Coming out of a community college that's got a good GPA, good track record, is in a high demand career area, there's transfer scholarships for them that some go as high as full rides for the final 2 years. So it's a very good way to go. And we've got, in Michigan alone, I think we've had a couple of astronauts come out of Washtenaw Community College who went on and got the circled the globe a few times in a space station. So it's a very good pathway.
That's awesome. I also think it's important to note too that, you can go on the Michigan .gov website and you can look up the Michigan Transfer Agreement, which was made with the community colleges and the major universities in Michigan, so that process is easier. I think we all remember having that fear when you were transferring from one school to another. I know when I was in school, I transferred from U of M Dearborn to Saginaw Valley for a hot second and lost a half a year in that transition. So you can't underscore the role that communication matters.
It's a good agreement. I actually
agreement.
was part of helping put that together for the 2 institutions I was with. So it's a very good agreement, and a lot of collegiality came to play to build a strong agreement for our students.
Yeah, I think it really changed the scope of that situation for a lot of families, and for different learners, especially coming from Eton Academy, where you are in a small classroom, right? We know 10 students in a room, 1 teacher, lots of support, lots of guidance as we're building our way to independence as seniors. And that leap to a 4-year university can sometimes be daunting. And some students are able to navigate that really well. And some students might fare better by transferring to a smaller local community college where they can get some more support in a different way than they might. When you move to a 4-year university, you're not just dealing with just academics anymore. Now you're dealing with independent living and social situations and getting involved in campus activities. There's so many other layers of college life beyond the academics when you go live on campus. And so I think this might be an opportunity to focus on that transition skill and transferring our knowledge from one experience to another at the community college level to prepare for the next step. So that planning process is such a great piece to highlight. That's great.
Great. We have a couple of questions that have come in. And so and then we have Maureen, who has also raised her hand on our Zoom call. So the first question ahead of Maureen was, due to the unemployment incentives, what information might you guys have access to of, income variations that would affect admissions or financial aid compensation?
That would still be handled through your FAFSA for financial aid application. So that's going to be a financial aid question that I don't have an answer for.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I think that your best bet is to go through the financial aid process. And I think it's going to be different for everyone what impact that plays on the financial aid offered. But yeah, I don't really have an answer for that either.
Thank you. The next question is, advice for juniors that can't go do college visits this summer.
A lot of institutions are doing virtual visits.
Mm-hmm.
Contact them, see what they have going on, do the virtual visit if you can. But just like the on-campus visit, try and also negotiate a time with the department or a faculty member within that department that you're interested in studying. Have that conversation, talk to them about your current situation, talk to them about your interests, your fears. I mean, this is not normal, to be totally online. And let's talk about, what kind of a learner you are and your passions and your interests. So try and get that virtual tour along with time in front of a department chair or a faculty member or a program director to try and, have that conversation. If nothing more, it'll help your student figure out, is this the place I really want to go? Is this the kind of program that I want to be in? These people either seem to be interested in helping me succeed or they're kind of aloof. It's a good way to get a feel for people. And more importantly, it's important to stress to your future student that they are interviewing the institution as much as the institution is interviewing them. We'd all love to have every student we can get our hands on, but we're not a perfect fit for every single student. So interview them. If you don't feel it, move on. But get that interview if you can.
It's really great suggestions. I think we, in our essentials class for the juniors, they're going to do a virtual tour project. So they need to choose 3 to 5 campuses that they're going to tour virtually and compare. We have a really great tool at Eton. We have Naviance. And we've been using Naviance with our upper schoolers all year now to explore careers and colleges and to manage this process. So it's a really good opportunity for parents and students to dive into Naviance and search different schools. And the neat thing is there's different qualities that you can look for. So for instance, if you want it in-state, well, then it'll narrow all the colleges based on the in-state. So there's qualifiers and filters that you can set so that it brings up programs that meet those interest levels. My recommendation for students when we start talking about picking colleges is like 5. Pick 5 to start with, and pick them in different locations and sizes and areas so that you can touch on the feel of a campus, right? There's a very big difference if I think just locally going to Michigan State, going to OU, going to Wayne State, you know, and then you can go out west and you can go to, you know, Hope College, and all of those have a very different feel on campus. They have a different size, they have a different focus, and they have a different environment. And I think it's really important that you pick those different environments to explore so you can figure out what feels right for you, because not every campus community and environment, you know, is a good fit for everyone. So I think it's important to pick different ones to explore so that you can compare, well, how big is this school? How many students are on campus? How big is this school? And what did that campus feel like? There's just very different things to offer, and it's important that you look at each of those variables.
Great. Maureen, if you would like to unmute and ask your question.
Yes. Do you think online classes will impact the cost of a credit hour or credit hours? Because, you know I have a lot of friends, and some got reimbursements that live down in Georgia just because of the fact their kids had to move home, and some because they were doing online classes. Is that something that's going to potentially take place?
I couldn't speak for every institution. I know that most of those refunds were due in large part to the lack of access to facilities and residential halls. So if they were going to school in Georgia and they had to come home to Michigan, it was likely the monies that they would have spent for the residency dormitories, their food plans, those kind of things were refunded back to them because they were no longer using them. Other classes, you know, we've seen around the country where a student might make a good case as to why they couldn't continue with a course because they became ill or some other thing, and they went through the process of requesting a refund and may have received that refund as well. But typically, if I ignore COVID for a moment and just look at online learning to begin with, typically institutions used to charge a little bit more for online learning because of the convenience that online learning brought. They actually, there was actually kind of a convenience cost associated with it. What I have seen is the leveling out of tuition. So credit hour in its traditional setting was X per credit hour. Then that is what it is online as well. There's no difference in the costs at that point. So I can't speak for all institutions. I know for us, our institution, if you're on ground taking a class or if you're online taking class, the tuition is exactly the same. And you're receiving the same content from the same type of instructors and meeting the same learning outcomes. So we're not seeing any adjustments there. But we're also not a residential. Well, we have a small residential piece, but we're not a residential institution. So we didn't have the same concerns with meal plans and with residence halls, which most larger institutions saw a significant impact financially for the institution by having to give those refunds.
I don't think I have anything much to add to that. I have a feeling that many communications of what I've seen in the press from organizations. I know that there was a lawsuit that somebody had filed for, you know, their tuition back, not being able to complete their program. And I think there's going to be a lot of that happens on a case-by-case basis, dealing with the institutions and the financial side. But I also have seen exactly what Dr. Bush said in the press releases, which is you're receiving the same learning, the access to the same professors, material, content, and the learning objectives are the same whether they're online and in person. So I haven't seen anyone say that they're going to change their tuition model for next year, given that they might not start off in person and on campus.
Great question, though. Very good question.
probably the piece that's weighing the most on, on a lot of minds, and goes back to that planning piece that you talked about, Dr. Bush, which is, you know, looking at everyone's situation is going to be different and how they've been impacted. And so going back to that planning process of looking at what your next steps are and what you ultimately want to achieve for a career goal and how to get there is just going to play ever more an important piece of this.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
You need to use as many of your resources as possible and do the homework. We usually present some of the sites that you can go to in this discussion, and I'll try and get that over to Betsy so she can send that out to everyone. But things like datausa.io, which gives you a really good display and data set on the institution you're looking at going into. So you can look at universities and colleges and look at what their demographics are, what their tuition is, what their scholarship rates are, all kinds of information there. So it's a good way to gather information. You can look at IPEDS data, which is the information that it has to be reported by each institution. And it's a kind of a report card. It gives you some idea of what's going on with that institution. You can also go to their website and find out, you know, to the institution's website to find out where are they accredited, who accredits them, and why that's important. You know, for example, I always tell everybody, if you don't want your student to repeat courses when they go to a four-year institution, make sure that they start at a regionally accredited institution, not a nationally accredited institution. And I could go into a really long oratory about why not national and why regional. Regional head to a much higher standard. The nationals, you can see a lot of national institutions that have gone under. ITT, Everest, parts of the Concordia conglomeration. I mean, they were nationally accredited and they failed miserably and they weren't held to a very high standard. Regional accreditation is important. Another one that's really important is whether or not, let's say your student is interested in nursing. Has that institution received a specialized accreditation for nursing? If they haven't, the likelihood is they'll go through the program and never be able to sit for the state exam for nursing. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would you even bother going to that program, right? There are programs like that out there. So making sure you do your homework, get as many data points as you can about that institution, learn as much as you can. News is very good as well. Look at the what's being written about that institution, what's going on, student life, what's going on in the community around that institution. This is going to tell you a whole lot of things about the safety of the community that they're in. And by the way, you can pull down on every institution's webpage the Clery report, which talks about any crimes or any things that are happening on campus or around it. So it'll tell you just how safe the place is. So go through all of it and pull all of that together so that you can make a really well-informed decision about that place that you want to go to. And that's what you want to do in normal times, and you especially want to do that today, is to get that information. And then you want to go and find out how well are they doing with this thing, online learning. That's not going to go away in its entirety for a while. And how effective have they been? And can you find more information out about how well did it go? Can you find that through your searches? Yes, you can. Students are writing about it. News is writing about it. And some have done an outstanding job online. Some have done an okay job. And then there's the few that have done job. And we want to avoid them. So, but again, I'll try and get as much of this over to Betsy so that you have those links that you can go out to, take a look, start digging around and learning more about it. It'll always lead you to more data. It'll always lead you to more things, but it at least give you the foundation you need to make informed and solid decisions with your student.
Absolutely. The other part of that conversation that Dr. Bush and I typically have at this time is about the path search for the student side. So typically he would stay with the parents and talk to you about doing the iPad search and looking at all the data. And I would take the students and we would go and do a breakout session about how to make money doing what you love, and who do you know is doing that, and what are your connections, what is your team. We start the presentation in the fall with our Life After High School fair, talking about building your team. I feel it's going to be even more important in these days to know who is on your team, and to make sure that you're building that team with a lot of diversity and reaching out to the people around you. We had a virtual career day last week, which I think was a really good start to showing students the connections they can make and the networking that they can do with professionals in careers that they would like to explore. And so I think we started that process of really helping our students understand who their support team is, what it looks like now, what it might look like next year, what it will look like when you go to college, and who are those people who you're surrounding yourself with to reach out to when you're doing these next steps. So I think all of that is going to play such a bigger role than I think we didn't realize the gravity of our conversations and where it would lead us until now. So I think that's a really great point. I know that we only have probably about 7 minutes or so before we need to go. I saw that we have a former student, Austin Gilchrist, who has joined us. I think maybe he's on the Facebook, and he had a question about trade schools. I coached Austin for a little while. It's good to see him. I'm glad that he is still using us as a resource. That's excellent. Betsy, do you know what his question was?
Yes. Austin's wondering, the impact on trade schools, especially when trade schools are all hands-on, and if there's any insight you guys have heard about that.
We're all struggling with that. I have several skilled trades type programs in my portfolio, and it's very difficult to say when we're going to be able to get back to that hands-on. There's a lot of interesting parts to all of that, things that we never thought we'd have to think about. For example, even if we were able to do one-on-one instruction with a student in a hands-on trade, how do I disinfect that equipment? How do I make sure that the room is disinfected and cleaned and ready to go for the next student? And what does that look like? So it's a very difficult question, and it's a very difficult situation for us to deal with. But we hope that in time we'll be able to solve that and get trades and the vocational work up and running sooner and more efficiently than they are today. Our welding students, for example, how do you weld at home? Yes, that's it. We've racked our brains, and fearing that they might set fire to their house with welding, we have chosen to postpone that for a little while. So
do you see that it's adjusting possibly the course path that students might take? For instance, whatever is recommended for the first semester for a trade program, will it alter what order they take classes in the meantime?
we do see some of that. There's hints of that, but most of the trades programs are very light on those things that you would put up front, like gen eds or things like that.
Sure.
They get right into the hands-on, and so it's not looking like we're going to be able to do that.
It's a really interesting position to be in if you were planning on going into a trade program and to not be able to engage fully. And it's a great time, Austin, to reach out to, counselors and representatives from the programs that you're looking at and see how they're handling each situation and what the recommendations are to keep you moving forward. I think that will be the best way to go. Betsy, did you have one more question from the Zoom?
Yes.
Looks like Christine does.
780's iPhone, whoever that is, if you could unmute first, and then we'll get Christine's question.
Okay. Perfect.
Hi, that's me.
Hi.
But I think my question is probably going to be more individual, so I'll contact Miss Casey. I don't know if you can help me. We were trying exhaustively to research. Xavier was accepted at LSSU, and they have a fire science program. And of course, they say their fire science program is the best, but we could not figure out a way to actually find out how it's ranked against other schools that have fire science programs. And when you were talking about accreditation, that's what made the question come up for me. So again, it's probably a more individual question.
I know if I have any more answers than I did when we started exploring this at the beginning of the year. But I feel, and maybe Dr. Bush has a website to recommend that we're not aware of, which might be very helpful. What I was able to find in my research was that they were able to say that whether they were accredited or not and who they were accredited by. And that became a very important piece into making sure that you chose a program that was accredited. So that the certifications when he came out and everything would be all set. But I haven't been able to locate any comparison of program to program, right? You and I both kind of found this is the best program in the country, right? Go here. But regionally or anything else, I was never able to find a comparison. Should LSSU's fire science be programmed better than Madonna's or
Right.
have you? Dr. Bush, any advice when you're coming up against that challenge?
Yep, 2 pieces of advice, especially like fire science. Contact the department and talk to them. Ask them about accreditation and ask them, so what makes yours better than anyone else's? Okay, that's the first piece. Just ask them directly. The second piece is see if you can't, I believe it's the, whatever I forgot now the licensing website for fire, police, that kind of thing. There's an acronym for it, and I can't remember it all of a sudden. Go on that website and look at whether or not they are ranked as an approved school for fire science.
Okay.
And those are the 2 things that I would do. It's a little different accreditation, it's a little different certification, but ask them directly. I think it's LAMA or something like that.
Okay.
So,
All right. I'll try that. You know, taking the school's word for it, you know.
always verify.
Right.
Agreed.
Okay.
And I think the other data piece that I think is helpful for the fire science program, but also for any program that you're looking at, are graduation rates and employment rates, right? I think a question that you always ask is, how many students in your program leave with a job, right? And have a career ready for them? And what are the connections and networking that you do to support that? I think this is an area that I feel, in my experience over the last 13 years at Eton, that my interactions with schools have been much more positive regarding career placement and career development. I think that it's an area that I feel is gaining more focus than it has in the past, probably because parents are asking those types of questions more, which is, you know, can you get my kid a job when they're done? So what do we want? Gainfully employed, independent, and happy adults, right? So I think that's a good question to ask as well.
Okay, thank you.
And I just pulled up LSSU's website and looked at their outcomes data for fire science student achievement. And they have pretty good rates for fire or state firefighter 1 and 2 certifications. So
Okay.
Good. Christine, I think we'll take your last question, and then before, just in case anybody has to go, you can email me with any question. You can find, Betsy will take some notes from what we are talking about today, along with the links and the resources, and put them up on our Eton Academy website. So you'll be able to access that there. But also, for those of us who are joining and not from our community, my email is mcasey, C-A-S-E-Y, at etonacademy.org. ETON academy.org. And you certainly can email me any questions you have related to life after high school, and I will do my best to answer and seek the advice of Dr. Bush. If I don't have the confidence in my own responses, then I will seek out answers for you. But please feel free to reach out if you have more questions than what we can finish up today. Christine, I'll let you ask the last one.
I just wanted to let you know that Michigan Rehabilitation Services, that they are still working, and they're working from home. And in the state of Michigan, they weren't cut, they weren't laid off because they were deemed necessary or essential workers. But what's crazy from like a student's perspective is, you know, if you were looking to get job placement or try a job at the beginning of this semester, the job market was pretty hot, and now the job market is, either 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 people in the country is unemployed. But Michigan Rehabilitation Services is still placing people in essential working jobs. But then I guess my question is, with the COVID situation, your student has fear. So it's like a trade-off, looking into job placement. So I guess it's more of a statement, but, do you have any information or trends?
It's way too early for trends right now, as this is evolving very quickly. And it's not something we've seen in this country for almost 100 years in terms of the impact that this kind of employment has. We have conversations about the healthcare fields and speculated on what new students might be thinking about those fields. We've had discussions about, where will they go? What will they want to do based on their experience through COVID? There will be many who will soldier on, and because of their innate desire to be that angel for someone to help them through the very trying times of illness and injury, and will go on to be some of the best nurses, healthcare providers, doctors you'll ever see in our history. There will be others who will decide to take very different paths. They may have started off looking at one career and going off into another because they're seeking a safer harbor, as they perceive it, a safer harbor. So I think the landscape of choices in front of students is going to explode rapidly as the economy returns to some sense of operation. I won't say normal, because normal was yesterday. And I'm always reminded normal's just a setting on your dryer. But I think what's really important right now is having that conversation. Don't let these young people stew on these things. Keep an open mind, keep open ears, listen to them, talk to them, find out what their passions are. They'll find that place for themselves. But again, let's delete the word jobs from our vernacular and replace it with professions and careers, things that excite them every day, and try and lead them in that direction so that when they do settle in on what it is they want to do, they'll do it, and the market will be ready for them. We still have areas that are in desperate need, from machining to manufacturing to healthcare and all areas of care. Technology jobs, business jobs, they're just everywhere. And I don't expect them to disappear. With the 30 million that are currently unemployed, I do not expect those jobs to disappear. I do expect our economy to ramp back up, and we're going to need to reemploy those 30 million and many million more within the next 2 to 4 years to get this economy back where it was prior to this mess. So hope. There's a lot of sunshine left in the distance. It's not a train, that light at the end of the tunnel either. It is definitely opportunity, and it's up to each and every one of us to take a deep breath, stay calm, and to look at that future with a positive lens and say, how do I achieve my dream in a world that is very cloudy right now? And it can be done, and I know they can do it. If they're an Eton student, I darn certain know they can.
Absolutely. And I want to end right there. That was a perfect, I think, closure to everything that we've been talking about. And I don't want to muddy that up. That was perfect. And I agree. I think there's a lot of hope and a lot of promise and a lot of opportunity for reflection, to look at what we really want to do and how we can get there. Maybe some development that we never knew was possible.
Great. Well, I'll just pop back on video. But I want to thank everyone for attending today. Mary Beth, Dr. Bush, thank you both for your incredible insights. Everyone that joined us either on the Zoom call for our Eton families or out there on social media. And please let us know how we can continue to be of help to you. Feel free to reach out if you're on social media. We will continue that comment section as well for any other information that we have to share, or questions that you may have. We'll get those passed along to Mary Beth and Dr. Bush. So everyone, thank you again for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Thank
Take
you
care,
so
everyone.
much. Thanks. Bye.